Welcome to the Healing Stories virtual mini conference, sponsored by the Consciously Parenting Project and iHeartParenting.com. My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Consciously Parenting Project and iHeartParenting. I'm the author of 3 books, Consciously Parenting, Creating Connection, and Nurturing Connection. I'm the parent of 2 boys and have dedicated myself to helping families create more connection. I have a master's in marriage and family therapy and nearly 20 years experience working with families around the world. I am so glad that you found me. I'm here with you today because I have struggled as a parent. I still have my challenges, but I've had to work hard to create the connection I have with my boys. I've experienced lots of loss, and that has profoundly impacted my parenting journey. My hope for you today is that you gain some tools or information that will help you to create more connection in your family beginning today. Healing Stories with Little Ones. How Stories Help Families to Heal. Special thanks to Ray Castellino and Mary Jackson of BEBA.org, Building and Enhancing Bonding and Attachment. Ray Castellino pioneered 20 years of clinical research about story showing and story sharing, and it is the process upon which Healing Stories is built. For more information, please check out the Little People Big Challenges audio series with Ray, Mary, and myself. What's your story? We all have a story. And if I asked you what it was like for you growing up, you could probably tell me things that you remember or stories that you heard about yourself. Those stories become the threads in the tapestry of who we are. Your child has a story too. Beginning before conception, this story has a huge impact on who your child becomes and the relationships that are created from the beginning. Know your story. Know your child's story. Know your partner's story. I often talk about using binoculars and not a magnifying glass when we're trying to understand behaviors that we're seeing in our families. We often are myopic and we're looking way too closely at what's going on, and we miss the big picture. This series is all about the big picture. It's standing back, it's looking at the big story that's going on and sharing some stories with our families to help heal when that's what needs to happen. So we're going to be exploring the idea of our story from preconception through our earliest memories to the present. We'll discuss story sharing, story showing, as a tool to heal stuck places in our stories. We'll talk about the importance of feelings and emotion in this process of creating connection. One of the biggest barriers that I hear when I start talking about this work and this research is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what our children know and are able to remember and what they're perceiving. It used to be that babies were operated on without anesthesia because they felt that the babies couldn't remember it anyway. But what they've discovered since then is that even though they can't remember consciously what happened, their body remembers. So young children beginning at conception are recording what happens to them in their cellular memory or their body memory. And that's a very, very different concept. Most of us, if you think back, what is your earliest memory, you might be able to remember something when you were 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. Those are typically ages at which people start remembering. But what's happening is that we have 2 different memory systems. We have implicit memory and we have explicit memory. And implicit memory is our body memory. And this is not something that we're consciously remembering. And then we have explicit memory, and that's like when I say, what's your name and what's the date today? That's explicit. Those are things that you can consciously remember. I also like to talk about the idea of an imprint. And an imprint is the first time that something happens and how it feels. So the very first time that you come into the world, how that feels creates an imprint. The way in which you come into the world creates an imprint. And many times we are looking at the way that we transition and we are re-experiencing that imprint. The way that I always find this fascinating when I look at my boys, and my oldest son came into the world very, very quickly. His birth was a little over 2 hours from start to finish. And when he learned to walk early, he learned to talk early. And in contrast, my youngest son came into the world very slowly. I can't quite tell you when my labor began. I know that he was born almost in the call. He didn't open his eyes for 5 hours. It was a very slow process for him. And he also walked and talked much, much later. So you got those big transitions and, from walking to talking to potty training. And they often, not always, but often, they go through it in a very similar way as they handle that very first transition. And that's an example of an imprint. The amygdala is a part of our brain. It's the fear receptor part of our brain, and it's online at birth. And this is the world safe? Is the world not safe? So when we go back to that idea of an imprint and how it feels, it has a profound influence on how we handle things later and whether we are on alert and ready for something to happen or we're not. It's that basic question of, is the world safe or not? Because that's our perception when we first come into the world. It's not just, is this situation safe? Is this person safe? It's, is the world safe? So when difficult things happen early in life, young children have less ability to handle it, to understand it, to regulate it, to share their story, to integrate. So let's go to an example where there's a child who did have a difficult birth, a difficult entry into the world. Because many times parents hear that whole idea of, oh my gosh, my baby can remember this somehow in their body. I don't quite understand what you're saying, Rebecca, but somehow they're remembering this. That's bad, because this birth was bad. So now what are we supposed to do? And that's part of the hope that I want you to take from this, is that even though things happen, and things happen all the time in our lives, we have little control over, if someone is ready to make their transition, if there is, a bigger situation going on, if the birth goes poorly. We don't typically have control over those kinds of things. And sometimes parents start to beat themselves up over that. But what I want you to hear is that stuff happens. And the most well-intentioned parent sometimes has something happen. But this whole idea of sharing stories and using healing stories to help a child to move through this and to create connection around it is actually deeply, deeply healing, not just for the child, but also for the parents.